Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Shiftless. I don't know if it's a new era yet, but I think I'm starting to figure out what direction we might want to go with this new iteration of things. Not 100% nailed down. Welcome to episode 95. First off, Caleb and Brad are off on a grand adventure down towards the Big Bend National Park area, Terlingua. Some of my favorite stuff. I am so jelly jealous. It's beyond ridiculous. I'm quite confident we'll have some really good stories from them as a result of this trip somewhere in the future. Don't know exactly when that will be, but I am awaiting with bated breath, so to speak. Isn't that the term that they use? I do think I'm narrowing down the format going forward. We definitely will appreciate anytime the chuckleheads can join us, or maybe one at a time. Maybe that flexibility makes things work, and their entertaining perspective is most certainly appreciated. We've always used bicycle news, industry news, latest and greatest, what's going on. That's been a core of our bicycle discussion, but I want to formalize that maybe just a touch. Organized, most definitely a stretch. I would not put that label on it. Anybody that's OCD would freak out if I tried to. And the reality is more similar to probably what Brad and I had in mind to begin with when we started talking about it. And the nuts and the bolts of it are we were just, I wouldn't say we were scattered. We were just shooting from the hip, so to speak. When Caleb was on board, when he was around, when he had a little bit more free time, it definitely reined us in a little bit. I'm working on my own organizational skills. So that said, I actually have formal topics to discuss this episode. First off, there's a carbon gravel bike recall due to catastrophic failure. We'll go a little more in depth on that. Salsa has rolled out a new bike. Maybe finally some good industry news from an industry giant, bicycle industry giant. Some feedback on what cutting public works, lands, workforce, what sort of consequences might be related to that for the outdoor recreation folks out there. And we're also going to talk about tariffs and how they do seem to be potentially affecting the USA bicycle industry at this time. I'm going to link all my sources on this. I'm not editorializing or anything. Obviously, I'll throw in my opinion here and there, but I'm just trying to put out some relevant industry news and let y'all digest it at your own pace. I'm just sharing as much as possible. I definitely look forward to whenever Brad and or Caleb can join in, and if they have opinions on this as well. Also, if you have your opinions, please do email. Don't leave comments on the various platforms that are out there. We're not able to keep track of all the comments on the different platforms. We don't get notification when somebody comments or anything like that. So if you want to talk to us, the best way is to reach out and touch us, shiftlesslive@gmail.com. That will definitely get to us. And along those lines, the podcast is now available on YouTube podcasts as well. That includes YouTube Music. Supposedly YouTube is now the biggest podcast platform. You hear that from Apple, you hear that from Spotify, YouTube saying they are as well. So if you are a YouTube audio, YouTube music, YouTube podcast absorber, you can find us there now as well. First off, tariffs and how they are affecting the USA bicycle industry or the bicycle industry as a whole. The source for this one is peopleforbikes.org, and e-bikes avoid new steel and aluminum tariffs. So that's the first takeaway. Bikes themselves are not being subjected to tariffs under the current iteration of tariffs. So the good news for the bicycle industry, and I will have the link for this story in the show notes. Essentially, bicycles, electric bikes, frames, forks, bicycle components, they are not part of the tariffs related to steel or aluminum at this time. So I assume that applies to China. I assume that applies to Mexico. I assume that applies to Canada. I'm not pretending to be an expert here. Feel free to visit this link and get more in-depth information. The bad news on this one, though, and this Brad and I on an episode previously when we were talking about tariffs touched on this a little bit. The imported steel and aluminum used by domestic manufacturers, built in the USA bikes. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know is there a major builder that's building in the United? I think it's mostly boutique-ish, custom, semi-custom type things. I could be wrong. Feel free to let me know, shiftlesslive@gmail.com. But domestic manufacturers are subject to the tariffs themselves when they're bringing in the steel to build bikes, essentially. Aluminum is being increased from 10% to 25%. And yeah, that includes coming from Canada. Aluminum and steel, if there's a domestic USA bike builder that's bringing in the steel tubing, the aluminum, things like that, they will be paying the tariffs. And that means made in the USA bicycles will be even more expensive. But the tariffs don't affect the imported bicycles and frames and things like that. And evidently the components, it's a wash. A bike builder in the United States that's building custom bikes or whatever else, they're bringing in their components. The components themselves aren't subject to the tariffs, but that also applies to the imported bikes and frames as well. So that's a quick takeaway there. Obviously, this is for lack of a better term, a fluid situation. Nobody knows exactly what's going on with these tariffs yet and how things may or may not change. I know a lot of people, their first takeaway is that tariffs are going to be very beneficial to United States companies to be able to compete with imported goods. In this particular case, it doesn't look like that's the current situation, but we'll see how that evolves going forward. I would definitely like to speak with a built in the USA bicycle manufacturer. So if anybody out there listening has some truly relevant opinions and practical application of this information, I would love to hear about it. So feel free to reach out and touch us along those lines. The public lands workforce, cutting of the public lands workforce will have consequences for outdoor recreation. And the source for this is the Outdoor Alliance. This is a press release. Again, the link will be in the description. Their press release, the headline is the new administration has implemented thousands of staffing cuts across land management over the past few days. At the direction of the new administration, the Forest Service, BLM, and National Park Service has laid off over 5,000 people, including park rangers. These reductions will make it harder for agencies to care for public lands and ensure safe, enjoyable outdoor experiences. Again, this is not opinion. I'm relaying the information. Here's the crux of where I want to go with it. Obviously, saving money is not a bad thing at the federal government level by any stretch of the imagination. Spending the dollars wisely is most assuredly an approach I think everybody can agree upon. The across the board cuts, I can't speak to that specifically, but I do know I have enjoyed a lot of the national federal lands over the past decade plus. And the reality is that, again, according to this press release, over the last 10 years, staffing at land management agencies has steadily declined. Over the past 10 years, this isn't just recently, staffing has declined even as visitation has increased. Since 2010, the National Park Service has seen a 20% reduction in full-time staff, despite a 16% increase in visitation during the same period. The Forest Service has been facing ongoing budget shortfalls, which include a recent hiring freeze for seasonal workers, further straining its ability to maintain trails, campgrounds, and recreation sites. And from my opinion, that's the thing to stay on top of. If you enjoy the outdoors, if you enjoy utilizing public lands, it looks like you're going to want to be more self-sufficient than before. And our next story is going to tie into this a little bit. You may not be a person that needs to rely on a camp host by any stretch. You're not worried about a park ranger being there. Maybe you're carrying a saw with you and you come across a trail that's not well maintained and you chip in and take deadfall out of the way and things like that. Fantastic. I know there's a lot of people that's not their ideal outdoor recreation experience at this time. Is it in the best interest of everybody for fewer people to be recreating outdoors, I'm not here to say, I know I like to do it. And there's times I'm perfectly fine being Jeremiah Johnson and completely taking care of myself. But there's other times when I like to be a little bit more relaxed and maybe have a little bit more of a glamping type experience. Variety is the spice of life. No doubt about that. So again, just things to be cognizant of. And it is a fluid situation. We don't know exactly what things are going to look like. Just keep your eye on the ball, see what's going on. Now, a byproduct of this, and we'll talk about it here a little bit, some good news from an industry giant, it looks. Let's bring this one up real quick. And our source for this one is Bicycle Retailer and Industry News. Garmin reports record year for consolidated revenue. That is good news. But wait, we all know, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, that Garmin is not specifically a cycling industry company. They've got their fingers in a lot of pies. But let's go over, again, link will be in the description below. Let's do the first couple paragraphs on this release. Garmin reported record consolidated revenue for 2024, buoyed, I like that. Garmin does marine industry stuff too, by a year-over-year 23% increase in the fourth quarter. That was led by fitness segment sales. So the fitness side of Garmin is what most strongly contributed to that growth. I see that as a super good sign myself. For the year, Garmin's consolidated revenue was up 20% from 2023. We won't go into specific numbers there. Importantly, the fitness segment sales, which includes cycling products, had the most year-over-year revenue growth in the fourth quarter at 31%. For the year, fitness grew 32% compared with 2023, basically from 1.3 billion to 1.8 billion. Garmin said strong demand for wearables drove the quarter's growth. So wearables, watches, heart rate monitors, things like that seem to be towards the forefront of that. I do know that a lot of cyclists are opting for the watches these days instead of the traditional bicycle computer handlebar mount. On the mountain bike side of things, I've seen a lot more of that. In my world, I don't see the watch being my primary computer, being a good fit for me specifically, but I'm not, hey, if it works for you, more power to you. I definitely want to hear from somebody on the wearable side of things. If you're focusing on, if you don't use a bicycle computer, or you still have an old one from 10 years ago or something like that, and you're relying more on the wearable itself, the watch itself, or maybe I'm out of touch and I'm not up to speed on everything Garmin has. Actually, I know I'm not up to speed on everything Garmin has to offer. Tell me what this current wearables market really looks like. I've been away from the watch myself most of the last 20 years. I stopped wearing a watch. I tried the Garmin Instinct a few years ago. It didn't really work for my needs, but that was me. That was not a Garmin problem. I recently picked up the Wahoo watch. I like it as a heart rate monitor. It's had bad luck with heart rate monitors over the years. And so far, this Wahoo watch seems to be the best heart rate monitor I've ever had. And maybe that's how people are using the wearables now. Maybe it does make more sense as a heart rate monitor and do other things as well. Give me your feedback. Give me your thoughts. What you do, shiftlesslive@gmail.com. I'd really like to hear about it. But one thing I do want to talk about, going back to the previous, and I promise these two topics do tie together, going back to that previous consequences of public lands workforce being diminished. Between that and Garmin, I have solid experience on the benefits of both to the cycling community. What I mean by that is having the right staff available at the right time is huge for others to decide how important it may or may not be in the grand scheme of things. I've had personal experience where available staff at a national park made a huge difference in my life, and direct experience where a good Garmin product, it's the same story. We had a club spinistry trip utilizing the beautiful Big Bend National Park a few years back, And it was an intimate group, close friends, and a grand adventure. Had a lot of fun, saw some beautiful sights. And part of our overnight was backcountry group camping in probably one of the most remote available in Big Bend National Park. Literally at the end of the road, Telephone Canyon 2, I think that's what it was. If you haven't been to Big Bend National Park, it's amazing. Like I said, I'm very jealous of Brad and Caleb being down there right now. On this particular trip, I was doing semi-support in the Spinistry mobile, lugging gear towards the campsite. And again, it was a small group. I think it was only 3 or 4 riders, maybe a couple more. And everybody was doing their own thing. But I got to camp, hauling gear, and went out on a hike, waiting for everyone to get in. I think Rich had already gotten in, or maybe he had ridden with me, or I'm not exactly sure. But Rich and I went off on a hike, came back to the campsite, and to discover that one of our party had taken a tumble and seemed to be okay, mostly okay, not quite sure. Another person that was with us we got there, and this person was keeping an eye on the rider who'd taken a tumble and engaging with them. It seemed like an odd situation, and then figured out what might be going on, and then I believe the rider go to the restroom or something along those lines. I can't remember, and was struggling, had issues, and collapsed. And we were in literally the middle of nowhere, no doubt about it. It wasn't like we could load up the truck and be somewhere in 15 minutes. It was a long way out. Now, when I say collapsed, the rider passed out and came back to consciousness, but obviously was not in ideal shape. It wasn't cardiac arrest or anything like that, no CPR, but essentially a concussion was involved, and we were having to figure out the best way to deal with it. There was definitely no cell service. That was not even part of the equation. We all had various satellite trackers and SOS devices with us. So we knew that, for lack of a better term, our worst case scenario was to hit the SOS button. There are potential consequences related to that, though. There can be very high costs related to that. Obviously, if it's a life or death situation, you don't even consider that. And this didn't seem to be a life or death situation, but it also was not this is just a bump and a bruise and we'll take care of it in a couple of days sort of thing. It's something that needed to be taken care of on the front end. And we were trying to determine the best way to establish that. I believe 2 riders had spot trackers, just the traditional tracker with the SOS button on it, no two-way texting capability. I think I had the spot with the two-way text capability, but at that point I had been less than impressed by the performance on that device. It was, for lack of a better term, spotty. You could send a message and you weren't sure if that message was actually received, sort of thing. And another person had the Garmin InReach Mini. And what that person opted to do was to use the Garmin InReach Mini to text their partner at home and have that partner reach out to the national park and talk to the rangers and figure out the best way to approach that. And this was getting late in the day. It wasn't quite dark yet, but the reality is, from notification, it's a good hour and a half before anybody could get to this spot that knew what they were doing. And it was very remote and it was rugged to get there. Ultimately, what came of it is the National Park Rangers sent one of the rangers out there to check on us, evaluate the situation, and ultimately transport our rider to the hospital in Alpine. I believe they ended up meeting an ambulance out at the main road and then following the ambulance there. I don't believe the park ranger took the rider all the way to Alpine themselves. I'm not positive of that. I'm pretty sure the patient, for lack of a better term, I'm not going to say victim, I'm pretty sure he listens to this, so I might get some feedback. The nuts and the bolts of it were, without that two-way communication from a Garmin device, our only option would have been to hit the SOS button, which, again, it's not a terrible option, but the net result may not have been any different. The recovery probably would have been the same process, where just hitting the SOS button, nobody knows what's going on, there's no way to communicate. Then they contact the authorities, and the authorities determine the best way to get help there. I'm quite confident that it would not have been a helicopter coming out there, most likely. It probably would have taken hours to get a helicopter out there. They probably would have sent a park ranger in a 4x4, which is what ultimately what happened. But we had the added communication up front that everybody was on the same page and knew what the situation was. And Garmin was integral to that. Appropriate park staff was integral to that. Appropriately trained park staff was hugely integral to that. Again, not that when lives are at stake that we're counting pennies or anything. I'm not implying that at all. But a consideration for that, if you push that SOS button and that helicopter comes, that could be a $50,000 bill to the patient. I don't know how all that works. I know it can be something like that. Something we learned in that trip from the park ranger, at least the way it works on federal lands, national parks, etc., aid and rescue along those lines, there's no bill for that. Now, I'm not saying you should lean on that by any stretch of the imagination. If you are using national lands for recreation and there is national support, personnel, resources, or whatever else, my understanding is that's part of their job. If there's fewer people to do that, it's going to somehow or another be cared for in another fashion. And I guess one way to look at it is F around and find out, do something stupid, prizes for stupid people or whatever it is. Hey, the lesson is don't take a tumble when you're riding your bike in a national park. I guess that's one takeaway. I don't think anybody ever plans on that. And we were a pretty capable group and things happen. So a big takeaway from that one was I immediately put my spot tracking device in the drawer, and it's been collecting dust ever since. And I invested in a Garmin InReach Messenger myself. It's not perfect, but it is definitely head and shoulders above the two-way communicator I had from Spot. Anybody that's been tagging along with our adventures probably knows that I'm not necessarily the biggest Garmin proponent, haven't been for a very long time. And there's multiple reasons for that. I'm not a Garmin hater. There's just been things about Garmin that have rubbed me the wrong way over the years. So I've opted, when viable, to go different directions. That might be, I know it's been changing. I did the Garmin Messenger InReach. I tried the Garmin Instinct, wasn't pleased with that. That's not a Garmin problem. It wasn't the right watch for me. Everybody's different. I am a huge fan of the Garmin Varia, the radar unit. That is, in my world, life-changing. It's been integral to me being able to get back on the bike with some sense of peace of mind. And so now that I'm talking through this, I'm probably a Garmin fanboy officially, now that I think about it. On the computer side of things, I would have loved for Wahoo to come back and be back in the game. The newest product doesn't seem to jump out at me. The old product still works fine for me. So I'm not saying I'm going out to buy the latest and greatest Garmin computer. My old Wahoo bike computer still works, still does what I need it to. I'm not missing anything. But if it does happen to fail in the near-term future, I would most likely be looking at a Garmin computer over the Wahoo at this time. So lots of roundabout there. Take from both of those stories what you will. Do we have wiggle room in the budget to get rid of public lands workforce people? I don't know. I know I would have, for lack of a better term, the service that we got in that situation was amazing, was top notch. I dread what may have happened if that hadn't been available. Garmin itself maybe leading the way, showing the way for the industry that things are turning around. I would love to see that. And I'm hearing rumblings of other things that maybe things are starting to turn around. Along those lines, possibly, maybe, sort of, don't know for sure. Salsa released a new bike this week, the carbon version of their Tributary adventure bike, the e-bike platform. Probably can't see it. It's probably blurring my background, but I have my aluminum one just over here. I am a huge fan of that bicycle but I'm perfectly fine with it being out as well. But Salsa is releasing the carbon version of it. Let me see if we can get some more detail on that. There we go. In the US, and there's different versions in Canada and maybe Europe as well. It's about the US guidelines versus the rest of the world's guidelines around e-bikes is essentially what it boils down to. There's a they call it the Tributary C GRX version with a rigid fork, Tributary C Rival, which I believe that, yes, that is a suspension fork, and a Tributary C Force with a suspension fork. Interestingly enough, it looks like the carbon version comes with a Fox fork instead of Rock Shocks like I have on mine. It looks like it's the same motor, looks like it's the same battery. Different fork on the suspension side of things, 2025 components. The pricing for the middle range one with the suspension fork, this is the Rival, is $6,500. The GRX with the rigid fork is $5,500. And the Force version with a suspension fork is $8,000 in a Bumblebee paint job. So here's my hot sports opinion on this. Hey, if you prefer carbon over aluminum, that's perfectly fine. There is no way with that motor and that battery and these components, there's no way that you can justify the carbon over the aluminum on weights. Okay, maybe it's a 48-pound bike instead of a 50-pound bike. I doubt it's even that much, but let's say it is. It's still a 48-pound bike. If you want carbon, fantastic. I'm not telling you not to. I don't see what the advantage of a carbon e-bike is in this situation, but I get it. Aluminum's not cool enough for a lot of people. That's perfectly fine. Aluminium's cool enough for me. I'll leave it at that. The Tributary platform itself is absolutely amazing. It's outstanding, but it's heavy as hell. When I'm on it, I enjoy it. When I have to pick it up, I regret it, if that makes any sense. And picking it up just to put it on and take it off the hitch rack on the back of a truck, it's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination, but I do definitely weigh my options. That comes into considerations. Do I really want to pick up this Tributary for this ride, or would I rather go a different direction? There are times that the suspension fork is most assuredly appreciated. I've been pretty happy when I use Jan's Confluence when I need an e-bike and I don't necessarily need the suspension fork. But the Confluence is not going to give me 80 to 100 miles of range. So that's definitely something the Tributary has a distinct advantage of. If you want a long range adventure e-bike, the Tributary is amazing. It's worth the weight penalty. But I don't think it's worth the weight penalty just for a day-to-day rider myself. Yeah, if you're rolling out of the front door and you're not going to be picking it up over gates or anything like that, or having to cyclocross with it on the ride, that's perfectly fine. But if you're loading it up on a hitch rack and driving somewhere to ride, particularly if it's a long ride and you've toasted yourself. I've had this happen to me where I was toasted after a long ride on a hot day and went to pick up that bike and got halfway up and my arms quit. So, nope, we're done. It's like, all right, I got to cool down and get some calories in before I can even load up the bike. This is ridiculous. So anyway, Salsa now with the carbon version of the Tributary. It's an amazing platform. I have nothing against the carbon version. They had the aluminum ones on, yep. Oh, wait, no, here we go. Ooh, this can't be, is this right? They had the aluminum ones on closeout a few months back, and those closeout prices were absolutely amazing. Apex Eagle US. There we go. Now they still do have the aluminum ones. There we go. Okay, here we go. So my version, the one I have, it's the Tributary Suspension Apex Eagle US version. It was originally $59.99 US dollars. It is now down to $40.99 reduced price. $6,000. I think that would definitely be too written. I bought the bike. I didn't pay $6,000 for it. I'll leave it at that. $44.99 This bike is worth every bit of $4,500 if it fits your use case scenario. Again, if you need a long range adventure, go anywhere, drop bar, mountain bike, this thing's amazing. I want to figure out how to do some multi-day stuff with it. That's on my to-do list. So the new compare Tributary C, GRX, Rival. So Apex Eagle, Rival GX. So it's basically a $2,000 upgrade to go carbon is what I'm carbon and a Fox fork for $2,000. I will let you decide if that's worth it or not. So the rigid fork version, that's $4,000 right now. I would definitely go, the suspension fork's worth every bit of $500. And I say that when I got the suspension fork Tributary because that was the first one available. In my mind, I would probably be perfectly fine with the rigid fork. After having the suspension fork, that flexibility for this type of platform, it's a no-brainer. It makes sense to have the suspension fork on this. I can go anywhere with this bike. It's that simple. Yeah, I'm still going to lean on the aluminum suspension fork one. Makes all the sense in the world from a Tributary platform. But if you want to spend more money and get carbon, definitely feel free. Support Salsa. I am a fan of the Salsa. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And finally, we do have a carbon gravel bike recall due to failure. And this is on all the cycling news, but a lot of y'all probably have heard this already or come across it already. BMC issues immediate stop ride notice on their gravel bike due to potential fork steerer separation. Fork steerer tubes have separated under heavy duty riding conditions. BMC has today issued a voluntary recall notice on its the BMC gravel bike, telling users to immediately stop riding the bike. BMC has become aware of a few instances where certain fork steer tubes have separated under heavy-duty riding conditions. That sucks. No doubt about that. I am not going to editorialize on that. BMC's definitely been known to put some super-duper product out there. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a carbon layup guy. It is what it is. Hopefully it's not indicative of any other problems with those particular forks or BMC or whatever else may be out there. If you have a BMC gravel bike, double check, make sure that's not what you're riding. Where do we go from here? Darn good question. I think I had something in mind to wrap this up with, but evidently I've forgotten what it is. I can assure you, I am going to go out there and ride my bike today. And as my friend Bradford tells everyone, hey, you also be sure to go ride your bikes.